In 1969, the Americans won the race to the moon against the Soviets with Apollo 11. With 6 missions and 12 Americans having been to the moon, the Soviets finally faced defeat in the space race. With the moon race lost, the Soviet Union began changing the goals of their manned space program to orbiting space stations. In February of 1970, a new program was begun known as the Salyut program. Salyut, meaning salute or firework in Russian, was to become the first orbital space station program. With Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev canceling the lunar landing program after 4 catastrophic N-1 launch failures and a desire to one-up the United States Skylab program, which was at the time still in development, the Soviet space program now gives its attention to the Salyut program. In the morning of April 19, 1971, at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the first flight of the program would launch, which would carry the first ever space station to orbit, Salyut 1. Salyut 1, designated as TOS-1 or Long Duration Orbital Station 1, originated as a modification of the at the time in development Almaz or Diamond program, which was a secret military program of the USSR. It would be launched on the Soviets' very own heavy lift workhorse, the Proton K, which would basically serve as the USSR's and later on Russia's go-to rocket to send all their space station modules to orbit. It consisted of 3 stages and the payload fairing on top. It was fueled using dimethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, both of which are corrosive and toxic chemicals, but had the advantage of not boiling off like cryogenic fuels, and also not needing an ignition system and could be stored in ambient temperatures.
Ключ на старт. Есть ключ на старт. Есть старт. Готовность 30 секунд. Протяжка 2. Есть протяжка 2.
After entering low Earth orbit, Salyut 1 would orbit alone until the first Soyuz arrived. That would be Soyuz 10, the first ever crewed mission to a space station. Soyuz 10 was launched on April 22, 3 days after Salyut 1 was sent to orbit, from Baikonur Cosmodrome on a Soyuz rocket. Inside are cosmonauts Vladimir Shatalov, Alexei Leliseyev, and Nikolai Kovishnikov. The Soyuz spacecraft used here, and for the next mission, is the Soyuz 7K-OKS. It was the first ever spacecraft designed specifically for space station flights, and is a modified version of the Soyuz 7K-OK, the original Soyuz. In general, all Soyuzes have three modules: the orbital module, the re-entry module, and the service module. Both the orbital and re-entry modules are habitable while the service module was not, and normally the modules will separate before re-entry into atmosphere. The re-entry module would be the only part which would return to Earth, while the other two modules burn up in the atmosphere. The main modification in the 7K-OKS was the addition of the new Sistema Stykovki Vynutrenergo Perechoda, or SSVP, which was a docking system developed by the Soviets for older space station plans. It uses a probe and drogue to bring two spacecraft together, and allowed internal crew transfer between the two spacecraft, something the previous Soyuz was not capable of. Modern versions of this system are still in use today on the ISS. When Soyuz 10 rendezvoused with Salyut 1, problems occurred with docking. Although they had achieved the soft dock, which means contact between the two craft without a full ink yet, the Soyuz's autopilot had a design flaw which made hard docking impossible, which means the crew would not be able to enter Salyut 1. Further problems occurred when the docking probe wouldn't retract, which means the two crafts were stuck improperly docked. The obvious solution would have been to jettison the orbital module of the Soyuz and go home, but that would mean Salyut 1 would be abandoned because future missions wouldn't be able to dock. Eventually, after ground controllers realized that the cosmonauts could just throw a circuit breaker on the docking mechanism, Soyuz 10 undocked from Salyut 1 and returned home, landing in Kazakhstan. A few months later, after the autopilot was fixed, Soyuz 11 launched on June 7th. The crew was Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. The mission aimed to have the first crew enter Salyut 1, which would be successful. The cosmonauts' 22-day stay in Salyut 1 included a burnt, smoky atmosphere when they first entered, a live television broadcast, and a fire which almost had them abandon the station. They also set space endurance records which would be held until the Americans' Skylab 2 mission 2 years later. Although Soyuz 11's goal was achieved, the mission would end in tragedy. After undocking from Salyut 1 and during re-entry, the Soyuz 11 crew became the first men to actually die in space. When the re-entry capsule landed on June 29th, the rescue team found the cosmonauts dead in their seats. It was apparently because the re-entry module depressurized due to a ventilation valve in the craft being jolted open during the separation with the service module, which suffocated the three men. The cosmonauts were given a large state funeral at the Red Square and were buried at the Kremlin Wall necropolis. They were posthumously given the Hero of the Soviet Union medal. Later on, Salyut 1 would be brought to a higher orbit to avoid a premature destruction due to orbital decay while the Soyuz was being redesigned. Despite this, the Soyuz took too long to redesign, and Salyut 1 was running low on fuel. It was later decided to conclude the station's mission, and on October 11th, the main engines of Salyut 1 would fire for the orbit burn. It would later burn up just above the Pacific Ocean. The first space station's mission has ended. The next Salyut mission, Salyut 2, and then after that Salyut 3, will be the first Almaz space station to fly, and with it, a secret military purpose.